Happy spring to those who are listening to the Language and Behavior podcast. My name is Joshua Stamper. I'm currently looking at snow out my window, which is absolutely disgusting at this time of year. And I have the wonderful Charlie Peck. Charlie, is it snowing where you are right now?
No, it's not. And I'm heading to Florida, so it's definitely not going to be snowing there.
I feel like it's a cardinal rule, like after spring break, no snow is allowed.
Yeah, let's make that happen somehow.
I think just universal. We'll just make that. All right. Hopefully everyone has had a wonderful spring break, or if you're in the midst of it, you're getting some time to relax. Last week, we had the wonderful opportunity to share out about a free opportunity for you, which is a webinar under the Thriving Educator umbrella. And Charlie, you can probably speak on this more, but I'm going to put the link on the screen. But for April 29th from 6:30 to 8:30 Eastern time, we just share a little bit about this event.
Yeah, you know what? We're going to showcase what we're doing with Thriving Educator in order to just have solutions for mental health in our schools to support teachers who are trying to support kids, and also to look at the system better and make improvements there. So I'm so excited. Josh, we're going to have 3 guests with us, Dr. Julie Hassan, Dr. Monroe, and then Mike Sipple Jr., which he's part of the Talent Magnet team who we partnered with to make all of this happen on a global scale. So there's so much going on, but yes, it's going to be showcasing all of that, and we're going to offer resources and everything for people who are coming into it. Yeah.
I'm so glad that you actually said Talent Magnet Institute, because that is TMI, which I continue to refer to within the acronym. But for Thriving Educator, the premium also, will you just share what all the resources are with that? Because I know you just constructed your first live teaching event, but I know there's more resources under that platform.
Yeah, that's what's so exciting about it. So Thriving Educator has a course, and that's around the 9 essential skills from the first book that I wrote with Dr. Cameron Caswell. And so those are the skills that integrate into everyday practice, which are great. What's really cool, though, is people have been asking us, well, how do we get these skills, and how do we have more leadership in our school to really make the transformation to improve youth mental health, utilizing our resources that we have in the schools? And so you and I wrote the Language of Behavior, and we have a great framework that we use there too. And so Thriving Educator Premium includes a course that's all self-directed, and all of the materials are there that are pre-recorded with the 9 skills. And then there's bonus like modules for leadership. There are extra resources like the school mental health audit, rapid resets, like just a ton of things there to help anybody on the school level who sees themselves as a leader in changing this thing, making improvements in school mental health. That could be teacher leaders, those rock star teacher leaders, Josh, in your building, those 10%.
For sure.
Right. School counselors, APs, principals, even district leaders are showing up in there. And so we have other resources. And then we have a community of all of these people who are trying to create this change, but sharing ideas. And then we have the community where we're engaging and sharing ideas there, asking questions. And the best part is this, and this is where people have been asking me for so many years, can you just do this regularly? Like, how do I be on this keynote, or how do I be on this conference or this workshop that we're doing? How do I get more of this on a regular basis? So we have a platform there where I show up live every month. That's professional development, but interactive in a way that I'm teaching something for an hour. And then after that, we do a live Q&A. So you get to be there with me, Josh. I'm so grateful for that, and that we just started. So I'm excited.
Very cool. Yeah. And I'm honored to be a part of all of this. There's so many wonderful resources for educators as they're trying to navigate through the end of the year, but then also to get set up for next year. So we, of course, will have the link to the webinar, but then also to a bunch of other places that folks can go to check out the premium to get that other content also. All right, Charlie, will you just share a little bit about Tenet 1 and what you went over within that first live teaching session? Thankfully, I got to be a part of that and saw the brilliance of you on screen and sharing out. I think people are going to love this as just an additional teaching piece. But, for those who might have missed it, I'd love for you just to talk about just the few items that you touched on for Tenet 1 within our book.
Yeah, and there's so much to Tenet 1. So when people ask me, well, what is that all about? Consider your environment. Well, I already know about that. I set up my desk. I know how to set the rules up and all that. It's just so beyond that, because you and I brought that mental health piece, the trauma lens, the kids who are struggling in the classroom, behavior, all those behavior problems. And so you and I address that So there's a lot to cover. In this session that I covered that first night is we talked about sensory surge and calm currents and how to identify in the environment, well, what is a sensory surge or a possible one, or what are the calm currents I'm already setting up. And so really we're looking at the energy of the room and the nervous system. How are we doing this? Because we like to look at how the brain operates, how the brain connects to the body, and how that is underlying behavior. That's what you and I do, right? We're looking at what's the behavior, what's the message behind the behavior, what's the need that's not being met, and what am I doing to set that up? So that's what I love about the first tenet here is consider your environment. So Josh, do you want to tell everybody why we said consider your environment? Do you remember like our conversation around that?
Well, I think for us, there's just a lot of things that we don't think about in regards to our classroom. And you provided a beautiful story, and I always laugh because when I was a teacher, I had the opportunity to be an elective teacher, be an art teacher. In my room, especially when parents would visit and they come in, their kid would be excited to show them their artwork. The first thing was their eyes got real big and they went, wow, because it was just a lot of stimulation visually with, paintings on the wall and on the ceiling and things hanging down. And it was just a lot. And so, for your student and the example that you provided in this live session, it kind of hits home for me because, it probably did, because of the environment, escalate some of the emotions. And, and you take in consideration of like, they really packed my classroom and people were practically on top of each other. And then you add the supplies and you add different smells, and then you have all this chaotic stuff on the walls. It could lend to seeing some behaviors just purely for the environment itself, not even about any other issues. So, for the things that you were teaching, I was just like, oh, I think a lot of folks don't even take into account just maybe some small things that could lend to some negative behaviors in the classroom.
Yeah. I mean, that's great that you said that because again, it shows that you are reflective. Even now, you're not even there, but it does make you think. And even when you were an administrator, you had a great story too around that with the parents coming into your office and thinking about that. And you also said something there that I address all the time with our leaders and our teachers is that we say consider because it doesn't mean that we're placing any blame on you at all. It's when we're trying to figure out how do we prevent things from happening in the first place. So we could look now and it's April, right? So we're like, okay, is there something going on now that I can address that might have to do with the environment and creating a sensory surge there that I may not have thought of? That's why you and I give this environment inventory just for conversation. It's not to say like to point the finger and say you're doing bad things. It's never about that because teachers are doing wonderful things. In fact, we actually use it as a tool to say what are all the amazing things you're already doing because you already are. It's also for leaders to work with their teachers or the school counselors even to have a conversation at the next staff meeting or in a PD session or just conversationally. This is a really good tool, the environment inventory, to see if there's anything in the environment that might be a little too cluttered for this kiddo who is having a behavior issue for you. So this is only like if we're thinking about setting our classroom up. So that's why we're doing this part kind of as leadership right now in April when we're looking at the first tenet. We're thinking ahead when you leaders are trying to set up the next professional development piece. We want you to think already now in August, when you go back, how can you be proactive for these kiddos and teachers? We want the teachers to feel good in this space too. And so you might be an art teacher and absolutely have a bunch of great things to post on the wall. That's good stuff. But what we covered in that session was Jessa. It's not her real name, but it's a real kid. And it was very overloading for her. Plus there were other things going on. And so when you and I look at a case study, we start with considering the environment. That's the first tenet, but there are other things we can do to explore the breakdown. And so these are the kinds of things we get to do in the live sessions that we just don't have time to do anywhere else. So I'm glad you mentioned that. But I mean, I just mentioned sensory surge and calm current. There were so many other things to cover too. It was really exciting.
Well, what comes to mind, because I know you covered a lot. It was about an hour session. We had a wonderful Q&A at the end, which was 30 minutes of taking the questions from those who were in attendance and being able to answer those. But was there any other aha or major points in that 1 hour that you want to touch on today?
Yeah, and I think we need to do an entire an entire podcast on this one thing too, is highly intelligent kids. So the very first thing in that case study was about Jessa being a highly intelligent kid. Well, what does that look like in your environment? If you have kids who have been identified as gifted, which we've got to be careful with those labels and everything. But if you do have a kid who's highly intelligent, this kid, she was actually reading by the age of 18 months. I mean, and more fluently by 2 years old. So, and this was a real thing. And so you have a kid like that entering your classroom who hasn't been identified as anything, just kind of shows up to your space. What might that look like in your environment? So we've talked in the past podcast episodes about not only our physical environment, but our social environment. So how do we work with kids like that, or think a little differently about behaviors that show up? So for example, highly intelligent kids, they might not connect with their peers very easily because their use of language is advanced and it sounds kind of odd to other kids. So if you hear your kids coming in and they're talking at a much higher level, they're using language that their peers don't, that might indicate to you, I wonder what's going on in the social space with this kid. Like what's going on with their peers? How am I showing up to them? Am I catering to them? Jessa, in the case study that was in the live session, she was drawing a lot. And so probably what was happening with her, only because I actually know this case well, is this kid was bored. And this kid already knew pretty quickly what was going on that had already been taught. And so in order to pass the time, she would draw. Also, kids doodle, and a lot of kids who have ADHD, actually, they struggle with concentration, but they can actually concentrate better when they draw or doodle, but they often get in trouble for that. And so there's just little things like that that popped in my head about the boredom, sometimes like the messy desk. And more importantly, Josh, I do have even another point here, is the teacher, the message that the teacher was showing the kid was that I don't really want you in this space because you're too much to deal with. And that was tough. And I really do think with some intervention and thinking differently and with that environment inventory, we can help so many teachers think differently about kids and actually be better equipped to respond more effectively to them. That's what we're trying to do here.
For sure. No, I felt like you were reading something from my past. I would draw in class and get in trouble. And I actually found for me, it was easier to pay attention and to keep my mind focused if I was doing that than just sitting there and trying, because I would lose my train of thought or go into a different world. So, and I was bored, but it was mostly because I didn't like school and didn't feel like it would pertain to my life. But that's a different topic and probably for another session. But I want to touch on one of the questions that I was pulling up from our first live, and I think it relates really well to what we're talking about. So can you share some examples of specific sensory tools or decorations that help students reduce anxiety in the classroom?
You know, it always goes back to the kid. So if we want to do a preventative measure, one of the things I loved to do, even in my high school class, I taught 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, often 11th and 12th graders. And I had a basket of things in there. And there might be, I love pipe cleaners because there's different textures for some of them, and then they can kind of wind them in their finger. It doesn't hurt anything, except now I will always say there's two exceptions there. Number one, if you have younger kids, of course, what are they going to do with them? They're going to poke others. And then you just, set some boundaries around them and say, hey, okay, well, that won't go in your basket if you can't use it properly, fine. But usually they really like it because it's something that they can just, again, play with while they're trying to listen. And there's actually a lot of things you can do with it too. Other things are like little stones in there just from the dollar store that they can just pick up in their fingers and kind of rub against their fingers. It feels good to some kids, or put it in their pocket. Little puff balls, and even some tools in there like extra pencils, just to consider that social space with kids, that there are going to be kids who forget some things, and putting it in the little basket in front of them, it just prevents interruptions. I know, like when we're talking sensory, some of these things are about anxiety that comes up for kids, and just ruminating thoughts there that attach a lot to sensory and how we feel in our bodies when we're thinking about things that we're worried about. Having a pencil in there is, oh my goodness, it could just actually solve a lot of problems. Some people are really sticklers on that. They're like, they've got to be responsible. And I say, well, we also might prevent a lot of issues too. So it just depends on what your needs are as well. But, and then thinking of like the space that they're sharing around them with other kids, like, is there enough space to move? Listen, we don't always have the space. I mean, sometimes we are cluttered, and that's not your fault. But how do we create some space that can be personalized. I mean, you literally may need to allow kids to put their heads on their desk if they're feeling overwhelmed, and just kind of give permission for that. Sometimes we don't need to deal with any of this stuff. We just need to consider it so that if we do see a behavior arising that we're uncomfortable with, or that seems like it's going to be just disruptive, then we can address it by saying, okay, how do we handle that overwhelm for you in this space? And I'll tell you the reason I brought up putting your head down on the desk, because a lot of kids come to me when I work with them as a school-based therapist. They're saying, I feel overwhelmed. Oftentimes it's noisy around me, and that's definitely sensory based. It's noisy, or the teacher talks really loud, or I can't stand their voice, or the kid next to me is humming. Sometimes it's them humming, but they're distracted by the noise. And so they're overwhelmed. So one of the strategies is, well, let's put your head down, because they'll say that that works, and they can actually get re-energized and then put their head back up and be able to function better. But what does the teacher typically say to that, Josh?
Well, pay attention and keep your head up. I mean, I'm assuming they're probably going to get in trouble because typically that's a negative behavior that they don't want other kids to replicate. This seems to be what I've seen as an administrator.
Yeah. And listen, fair enough. I get it. But also, I will say it could be very helpful and help that kid to function to just take some communication around that.
Yeah,
And that's
definitely.
why we say consider the environment, because it's the physical environment, it's that sensory surge. How do we create those calm currents? Putting your head down or allowing the kid to put their head down could create the calm currents, considering how we show up. Josh, when you and I work with schools with our school-based, like our year-long plan, and we do teacher observations, we have the teacher sit in the chair as the student and then see what they might look like as the teacher. So that's a really good way to say, like, what is awareness that you might need to pick up on?
Yeah, and building that safe space also, because, I'll give you an example. As an administrator, I walked into a classroom. It was an ELA time. Kids were everywhere. They were reading, and there was one kid under a desk, laying down, flat on the ground, on the carpet, with a blanket over a chair or a desk, almost like a tent. Well, I could have been upset with the teacher. What is going on? And I didn't. Obviously, I was asking clarifying questions of, can you explain what's occurring over in that corner? And she explained that some students have anxiety and they feel like this is a safe space for them, and they ask permission to go and to read in there. And, it's not just one child, it's a couple of them, and they get to rotate in and they read, and they're actually being successful with that. And so instead of passing judgment as the teacher or the administrator, actually, creating, considering that environment, considering the needs of your child. And it didn't cost anything. The kid brought the blanket in. It didn't even, require anything. It was just an extra chair, extra table that this person had, and constructed a little space for them. So, I always love that as an example, because it just has a question of a student, what is their needs, and then just finding the resources quickly to construct something and where they're going to be more successful because of it.
Yeah, and other kids pick up on that too, and they get to rotate in and out. You said some kids don't need that, but the kids who do, they appreciate having that space to do that. So of course they're already going to feel validated and connected and not judged by that teacher. I love that story. I just love that so much.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know we can go into a lot of different directions here. I love the questions that were during the live session, and maybe we can pull from that again in future episodes. But there's a lot to talk about, specifically just in this tenant one. I flash up the website to learn more about our book, The Language of Behavior. I do want to thank those who are reading it and reviewing it. We've got now, Charlie, 13 5-star reviews on Amazon, which is fantastic. So anyone that's listening that has the book, feels like it's a wonderful resource for themselves and others, we'd love for you to jump in there and add to the reviews. And you can find more information not only on the podcast, but our services, the book. There's free, different things there as far as inventories for folks. And then also you can head over to Charlie's website over at thrivingeducator.org. She's got a whole host of different things there for folks. So make sure you're heading there. And then I just want to remind people that in the show notes, of course, we'll have this link for the free webinar, which is going to be in April 29th. Again, the time for that is 6:30 to 8:30 Eastern time. And you can register at the link that's on the screen for those who are watching on YouTube. Or if you click on the link in the show notes, you can head over there and sign up. All right, Charlie. Do you have any closing words for episode number 20?
Yeah, you know what? I want to remind people that they're already doing really great things with their social space, their physical space, and thinking of kids. So start there. Start there, and then just consider what might be happening next time you go into that space and just think a little differently about it.
Wonderful.